What's going on, everybody? It is a Tuesday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Nick Whalen, Kirien Sprecher, back with you this week. Our guy, Alex Barutha, our guiding light here at RotoWire in the NBA department, on vacation this week. So Kirien, kind enough to join me for the second straight week here. Apologies, we have a different schedule this week. Normally, of course, we would do this episode on Mondays. Had some things going on over at RotoWire HQ yesterday, so I had to push it to Tuesday, but honestly, Kirien, I think this worked out better because we have two trades that just broke within the last hour that we now get to break down. We'll give you all the fantasy ramifications from Jaren Jackson Jr. ending up in Utah. Had a less exciting deal just go down between the Bulls, the Timberwolves, and the Detroit Pistons. So we'll tell you all about that. And of course, we will answer as many questions as we can from the chat as the show rolls along. Before we get into any of that, though, as usual, we're brought to you by our friends over at Dabble. And Dabble is not just another DFS app. It's the ultimate social platform where you can connect with other fantasy sports lovers. Dabble lets you win big. We're talking up to 5,000 times your money this basketball season. And starting off with Dabble, super easy. Users get $25 free just for signing up. No deposit necessary. You can check out the link in the episode description to download the Dabble app and get playing. All right, Kirien. Let's dive in. We are still roughly 48 hours away, a little over 48 hours away from the trade deadline on Thursday. We're starting to see some dominoes fall. I did not see a whole lot of Jaren Jackson's probably going to be a Utah Jazz after the deadline buzz leading up to this. This one came out of nowhere. So to give you a summary of this deal, the Memphis Grizzlies send Jaren Jackson, John Conchar, Jock Landale, and Vince Williams to the Utah Jazz. Memphis gets Walter Clayton, Kyle Anderson back in Memphis. They get Taylor Hendricks, Georges Niang, and 3 future first-round picks. That means Memphis now has 13 first-rounders in the next 7 drafts.
That's incredible. I think the first thing that I look at with this trade is the Memphis backcourt or front court with Jaren Jackson no longer there. With the Jackson trade, we're looking at Santi Aldama as the starting center. Georges Niang coming over, he'll play some backup, and then they also have Brandon Clark and Zach Edey who might not play again this season. So that center spot is really weak. Santi Aldama should be rostered in a lot of fantasy leagues. He should have a ton of usage moving forward. And then the power forward spot, Taylor Hendricks, I put him at the top of the depth chart. At power forward for the Grizzlies here. Obviously things are going to change, but right now he's competing with, OMP, Gigi Jackson, and then Santi Aldama, who's going to be starting at center. So I think from a fantasy perspective, after this trade, it's a really good place to start looking at this Memphis front court and who's going to emerge as a producer out of there, because that's going to help us win some fantasy leagues.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I thought about here is there are some winners on the margins. You mentioned Aldama, really by default, like anybody who is capable of playing the 4 and the 5 for Memphis, it's going to be all hands on deck the rest of the season. And, with the caliber of players that we're talking about, Memphis is very clearly now just embracing the tank, right? They're like 4-13 in their last 17 games. Like I think they've seen the writing on the wall that we've all seen for a while. And I think in a lot of ways, it's smart to get ahead of this. Obviously, it's fair to wonder if a Ja Morant trade will follow this in the next 48 hours. I think that is very possible, if not likely, at this point. Even if Ja Morant does remain on the Grizzlies roster for whatever reason, I mean, over under 15 games played the rest of the season? Like, there's just very little incentive to run Ja out there with, a bunch of these young guys and what's now very clearly a tanking mandate for the rest of the year. But if you are capable of playing the 4 or the 5 for Memphis, there will be minutes available. It seems kind of crazy to say, yeah, Taylor Hendricks is that guy. I think he is going to be that guy by default because Santi Aldama can't play the 4 and the 5. And then you're getting into Omax Prospers on a 2-way deal. I do think Gigi Jackson, especially in deeper leagues, he's somebody that when he got some run, I think that was 2 years ago now, we saw what he's capable of. So he's somebody I would certainly keep an eye on. And we kind of have to wait for that next domino to fall as far as sorting out the backcourt goes. But if we just set Ja Morant aside, Ty Jerome is now back in the mix. He's played well in his first 2 games back. Hasn't really looked limited or hampered whatsoever coming off of that injury. They should be getting Scottie Pippen Jr. back soon. That could come before the All-Star break. Maybe they give him a little more time, but he's going to be back within the next month. Got Cam Spencer. Now you're adding Walter Clayton to that mix. So even if we're assuming that Ja Morant is moved, and who knows what that deal looks like, maybe you're bringing back another guard in that trade. Is it kind of a no change for you for Jerome and Spencer and Pippen?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of been operating under the assumption that, Ja is hurt right now and he's not really playing, and he might get traded. He's not going to be a part of this Grizzlies future. So I've had my fantasy stock in, Ty Jerome and Cam Spencer here for a while. I know there's a lot of people, especially in the chat, we get a lot of questions about Scottie Pippen Jr. coming back too. And Gigi Jackson, he's had some moments in previous years, but I think Ty Jerome is the player that they invested the most in, so they're going to give him the runway, and then Spencer would be my number 2 if Ja does get traded. But I feel like I've been operating under the assumption that Ja is not going to be a big part of this team. And I hate to be, I feel like it's lazy to just have a trade like this and then be like, well, what's next? But yes, you're absolutely right that, Ja Morant is this next domino to fall. And Memphis is clearly headed in this opposite direction. I'm curious what your thoughts about the Utah Jazz, future is. Obviously, this isn't a win now mode, right? Like, they're not going to push for a play-in spot. I think they're 8 games back of a play-in spot. But do you think this means that, Lauri Markkanen and these guys are going to play down the stretch to get some, run with their new teammates? I think there's clear an obvious opportunity in Memphis to capitalize from a fantasy perspective, but then in Utah, it's kind of like I'm scared. Kyle Filipowski was one of these guys that I've been targeting really heavily. Thought he was going to be a silly season winner, but now I don't know what Filipowski's stock is moving forward.
Yeah, it does muddy the waters a little bit for Utah. It is important to note that so here are the details on the 3 first-round picks that are heading to Memphis in the deal. So it's a 2027 first, which is the most favorable between Cleveland, Minnesota, and Utah's own pick. It's the Lakers' 2027 first, which I believe is top 4 protected, and then a future Phoenix first heading to Memphis. So this does not change the direction for Utah the rest of the season. They didn't give up their own 2026 first, so there's still incentive for Utah holding that pick and currently sitting 13th in the Western Conference and really just 2 games out of the bottom 4 right now, with Brooklyn, Washington, Indiana, Sacramento, and New Orleans. There's still plenty of reason for the Utah Jazz to want to tank this thing and try to find their way into specifically a top 4 pick. But honestly, even if you're picking 5th or 6th in this draft, you're getting the type of player who would go perhaps 2nd or 3rd or 4th in a lot of other drafts. So I don't think it really changes anything for me. If you're rostering Jaren Jackson, I don't think you like this at all, because there is the argument that you want to get him on the court with Markkanen, you want to get him some reps with Keontae George, but you don't want to win too many games if you're Utah. You don't want to be pulling away and all of a sudden you have, the 8th worst record instead of the 4th worst record at the end of the season. So I think this has to be a downgrade by default for Jaren Jackson Jr. All of a sudden Utah has Triple J, Nurkic, Lendell, Kevin Love, if we want to count him, but he is seeing minutes. You mentioned Filipowski can play the 5. I wouldn't be surprised if they move off of one of those guys. Nurkic, I think, feels like the obvious guy to be moved. And even Lendell, could end up being rerouted by Thursday afternoon. But yeah, this is not ideal for Jaren Jackson Jr. because there's nothing to me that would indicate that the Jazz should be interested in just flipping the switch and trying to be competitive when they're already out of the playoff race.
Yeah, and you brought up this draft class, and obviously it doesn't impact this year's fantasy too much, so I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. But there's been some chatter about Cooper Flagg would go 4th or 5th in this draft.
No.
Yes, this draft is good. This draft is good, but that doesn't mean that Cooper Flagg still wouldn't have been the number 1 overall pick in this draft class. I would put a lot of money down that nobody in this upcoming draft class is going to score 49 points as a rookie.
Who said that?
It was somebody on ESPN. I don't remember who, but it got aggregated all over the place, and people were hyping it up. This is a very good draft class, but I don't think it's quite to that level.
Yeah, mostly agreement in the chat here. Santi Aldama will fly to the moon for now from Manila's Most Wanted, which I agree with. You got to play somebody if you're Memphis. Triple J about to come down with tankitis. Unfortunately, I agree with that. And then to kind of revisit this, because this is really what we're concerned about, right? Who are we picking up? Who are the beneficiaries here? You mentioned Taylor Hendricks as somebody who I think will get plenty of run in Memphis. I mean, I remember I was a little excited to get Taylor Hendricks for $1 at the end of our staff auction. Like, he was the guy I had in my queue, and I'm like, man, I really hope nobody else takes Taylor Hendricks. And within 3 games, it was clear that was not going to work out. But this dude was a lottery pick not that long ago, right? I think there is potential here. I'm excited to see what he could be the rest of the season. And look, I like Walter Clayton a lot. I think of all the pieces that Utah parted with, outside of the draft picks, that was probably the most difficult one to give up. I think the sell on Walter Clayton is, he's an older prospect, but he does a lot of things well. He was obviously a winner at the college level and one of those guys who, I think could step in and be ready right away. I think they want to get a look at Walter Clayton. And, the difference between him and some of those other guards that we talked about with Memphis is he can play the two as well.
Yeah, they're going to need to play the two because Jalen Wells and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope have struggled mightily. Cedric Howard has been pretty fun, but he can play on the wings too. If it's Hendricks or Clayton for me, I'm just going to take Hendricks just because he has less competition. I think Clayton is a very fun player and a fantasy friendly player, right? Like if Clayton starts playing 35 plus minutes, he's going to be an absolute stud in fantasy. But I think Hendricks has a clear path to that 30-minute role over Clayton.
Yeah. Anything else for you on the Memphis side of things? I mean, it bears worth mentioning that you are basically removing a 27% usage rate now from this rotation. Yeah. And again, we're kind of operating under the assumption that Ja Morant, if he does remain in Memphis, won't play many games the rest of the season, or more likely is just gone by Thursday. I mean, I think you have to upgrade Cedric Howard going forward.
Yeah, I would be fine with that. I've been pretty high on Cedric all season. This has been a fun rookie class, a deeper rookie class than this upcoming class. But I think Cedric Howard gets more usage. But if I'm in a category league, that's not always the best thing for a rookie. He does have a nice shot, and he's a pretty efficient player so far. But if he starts, a 20 shot attempt role, I would be worried about his field goal percentage in a category league.
Yeah. That's fair. I mean, we have a very limited sample to work with as far as Coward, with a high usage rate. This is not the best way to do this by any means, but it's the quickest way. Yeah. He has 5 games this season where he's taken at least 15 shots. In those games, he's averaging 21.5 points, 11.2 rebounds, 2.2 assists, 1 combined steals plus blocks, 53% from the field. So again, 5-game sample. He hasn't taken more than 18 shots in any of those games. But I get your overall point, which is the scaled up usage can be great, but it can also lead to guys taking the type of shots that maybe they're not ready to take when you're early on in your career.
And in those games, I feel like he was getting 15 shots because they were going in, right? And now he's just going to get 15, 20 shots because he has to get those attempts.
It's still an upgrade for me though.
For sure.
I mean, somebody's got to do things for the.
I feel like I've been high on Coward already, so maybe he was already in that upgraded category for me.
All right, so before we talk about the other trade that went down this afternoon, looking longer term for the Utah Jazz, again, I think we're of the belief that this is not good for Jaren Jackson Jr. just in terms of games played rest of the season. Obviously, things are fairly open for him in Utah, much like they were in Memphis, but you just have to worry about the tanking, which honestly was probably going to be an issue in Memphis as well. So, with the way that they have played over the last month, so maybe it's more of a no change if you were already concerned about that. But either way, rest of season for Jaren Jackson Jr., certainly a downgrade. What does this look like next year, where you're conceivably rolling out Walker Kessler, Triple J, and then Markkanen now at the 3?
Yeah, I think this is a team that is ready to compete. I think this is all predicated on Keontae George's breakout season. I think they feel like they have a true, star point guard, a point guard that you need to have in today's NBA that can handle a ton of usage, can make threes, can get assists. And then you surround him with, tall, lengthy guys that can hit threes. We'll see what this means for Walker Kessler's future. I feel like Walker Kessler's always been a better on paper or in theory player than he actually has been on the court in terms of just like wins and losses. He's obviously had some good statistical games. So, with Jaren Jackson, obviously I like that lineup of Kessler, Jackson, and Markkanen, but maybe it's Jackson and Markkanen and they go out and get some more guard depth. But I think this is a clear sign that, Will Hardy and company are ready to take the next step. And like we talked about a little bit earlier, I think if that is the case, you got to get these guys on the court a little bit. I know you said downgraded Jaren, and I agree with that, but I think it would be a lost opportunity not to get at least, a handful of games with these guys, but to see what they need to work on and match in chemistry going into the offseason.
Yeah, you just don't want to risk winning too many games. And to address this in the chat, the Jazz did not trade their own 2026 first. They traded 2027, which is also potentially not their own pick, and then future picks. So they still hold their 2026 first round pick. Okay, let's talk about the secondary trade. This one feels a little bit minuscule relative to the Jaren Jackson deal, but we got a 3-teamer between Chicago, Minnesota, and Detroit. Chicago lands Mike Conley, which we should really just say Mike Conley's contract. They get Jaden Ivey from Detroit. Detroit gets Kevin Huerter, so they had some shooting. They get the Dario Saric contract, and then they get a 2026 protected swap from Minnesota. So given where those teams currently stand, if the standings locked as they did right now, Detroit would potentially move up 7 spots in the draft. So nice little value add there by the Detroit Pistons. Minnesota doesn't really get anything here. This is more about tax relief for the Timberwolves. They get under the first apron. They shave off about $20 million in luxury tax and obviously open up more flexibility to continue their reported chase of Giannis Antetokounmpo. So that's the primary goal from the Minnesota side. Let's go to Chicago first, because I think the Jaden Ivey piece, even for as disappointing and kind of ineffective as he's been this season, like that's still the headliner to me, given where he was drafted, given what we thought he could be coming into the league. So where does he fit for you in Chicago?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, you mentioned the trade foreshadowing another trade, right? This trade, to me, the Bulls have been shopping Coby White. That's not a secret at all. So this trade to me feels like Coby White is out the door here, and the Bulls are going to want Giddey, and then Dosunmu and Ivy are going to be in a little bit of a competition here. I was really high on Ivy coming into the season. I like the Pistons a lot. I thought he's going to have that injury, the missed time because of the injury. He's going to come back and he's going to be a really productive player. And that just wasn't the case. I think if you talk to Pistons fans, if you watch Pistons games, Ivy doesn't look, bad when he's on the court. There's just no reason for them to play him 25 minutes because they needed that shooting. And I've said it so many times on the show, but Malik Beasley and Tim Hardaway Jr. made a ton of threes for this team last year. And you bring in Duncan Robinson, he makes some threes, but that's a 2-for-1 swap. They're missing that shooting. Cade Cunningham, Tobias Harris are streaky shooters. Isaiah Stewart is one of their more consistent 3-point shooters. So I really like this move for the Pistons, but the Bulls, Jaden Ivey is going to get a runway here. I know they have a ton of guards. Trey Jones is hurt right now. Josh Giddey is hurt right now. But I think this is a better opportunity for Jaden Ivey, and I don't think he's worth a pickup, in standard fantasy leagues at this point, because he's just not going to produce enough. But he's definitely a player that I'm watching in deeper leagues. And I think, as the Bulls season moves forward here and what happens in the next couple of days, there could be a huge opening for Ivy in this rotation.
Yeah, I think a lot of this depends on, do they move Coby White, who it seems like an obvious trade candidate, expiring contract. Vucevic, of course, falls into that category as well. Less of a direct effect if they were to trade Vucevic, just given the positional difference, of course. But either way, you're taking out 20 to 25 minutes a night of Kevin Huerter, and you're bringing in Jaden Ivey. So I think there's going to be a role there, even in a world where the Bulls just go full Bulls and hold on to their expiring contracts and lose these guys for nothing. But I think they're going to trade Coby White. And I think, it's Ayo Dosunmu and Jaden Ivey seeing the bulk of the minutes at the 2. I'm a little skeptical on Ivy. I think even when he's played well, he's one of those guys who I think is better in real life than he is in fantasy. He doesn't give you a whole lot on the defensive end. The assist numbers have been pretty brutal this season. He's actually shooting it pretty well from 3. We talk about Detroit wanting to upgrade shooting, and you get a much better spot up shooter, of course, in Huerter. But last 20 games, Jaden Ivey's shooting just under 40% from 3. Now, he's playing 18 minutes a game in that span for a reason, but clearly they felt like Kevin Huerter would be an upgrade there. There's not a whole lot we could say right now on Minnesota. It's pretty clear that they are at least trying to enter the Giannis sweepstakes. We'll see if they're able to successfully do that. On the Detroit side of things,
before you move on from Minnesota, I think Darius Garland is a real target for Minnesota too. I think this James Harden, Darius Garland thing seemed like it was on the doorstep of getting done, and then there was some Harden complaints about this no trade bonus, and then he wanted an extension, and it kind of fell through. If that James Harden, Darius Garland move doesn't happen, I would be on the lookout for Darius Garland to Minnesota. I think that would be a nice fit for them. They just need to, make that work. And I think getting rid of Conley's contract is the first step in trying to make that work.
Who's Minnesota giving up in that deal?
I mean, you don't like Bones Highland, Nick? Come on, Rob Dillingham. I think, it would be difficult to like come up with like a perfect trade, and I don't think they have many young assets, and it'd probably have to be some sort of draft picks. But obviously Cleveland wants to compete too now. I think if that trade did happen, Cleveland would have to be a 3-team trade, and Cleveland would be getting someone, maybe Ja Morant goes to Cleveland and Darius Garland goes to Minnesota, and then we get into the real circus.
That would be something. If I'm Cleveland, I'm not bringing in Ja Morant to pair with Donovan Mitchell. But yeah, you're right. I mean, Jaden McDaniels has been rumored to be involved in some of these deals. Will Minnesota put him on the table? We'll find out. Cleveland to me conceivably would not be overly interested in Gobert, given how they're currently structured. Maybe Randall is involved, maybe DiVincenzo, but yeah, too much to speculate, I think, for now. I'm just hoping we get, I'm watching my phone for Shams alerts, and we get something here, while we're live. All right, on the Detroit side of things, so they send out Jaden Ivey. They essentially bring in Kevin Huerter. I wouldn't expect Dario Saric to play for them really at all this season, and then they get that protected swap with Minnesota. Where do you see Huerter fitting in? Does he basically just absorb the Ivy minutes, and it's relative no change for the rest of this roster?
Yes. I put Kevin Huerter ahead of like Javonte Green and Ron Holland in the rotation, and I understand that those guys have played big minutes for a team that's sitting at first place in the Eastern Conference, right? But I just think that shooting is going to be so important for Detroit. And when you look at their depth chart and you Karis LeVert, Ausar Thompson, Ron Holland, Javonte Green, like those guys are all, I hate to say it, but like somewhat redundant in terms of their play style and what they can offer you on the court. And so you bring in Kevin Huerter, and he gives you a new skill that you didn't have access to. So I hate to, I wouldn't say that Kevin Huerter is going to see a huge role, but I think that one of Duncan Robinson or Kevin Huerter is going to be on the floor probably at all times for the Pistons now.
Yeah, again, this is just about upgrading spot up shooting, addressing a need. I think Detroit has been pretty forthright as far as, look, we're not trying to enter the Giannis sweepstakes. We're not trying to get in on Ja Morant. I think they feel pretty good about where they're sitting right now in the Eastern Conference. Got a question about Taylor Hendricks, Kirien. Well, not really a question, a statement. I don't see how Taylor Hendricks could be good, LOL. He's had good runs before, but never really showed up. That unfortunately is accurate. Obviously, Hendricks missed pretty much all of last season. I think he played in the first 3 games, had that horrific injury, and then sat out the rest of the year. So missed 79 games. He's missed a ton of time again this year, hasn't played in a while. Only has a handful of games where he's played even 20 minutes this season for Utah, which is saying a lot considering it's the Utah Jazz and how much time, Kessler and Markkanen have missed. So he has 5 games, where he's played at least 20 minutes. In those games, he's averaging 13 points, 4.5 rebounds, 1 assist, 0.8 steals, 0.2 blocks, 1.6 threes.
I think the biggest thing that I look at for Taylor Hendricks is that he shot 40% from, or 38% from 3 on almost 4 attempts per game as a rookie. And he started 23 games as a rookie. And then, like you said, he had that gruesome injury as a sophomore. And so I'm going to give him a little bit of grace. And, when you have a big injury like that, coming back and performing at the top of level, especially when you're so young, it's hard to do. This is just kind of one of those, new places, see if he can take advantage of a new opportunity. Taylor Hendricks is still like a good basketball player in relative terms, right?
We'll see. He will have about 35 games down the stretch here to prove that.
And if not, like you mentioned earlier, Gigi Jackson, he's proven it before too, and might even have a little bit deeper resume. So like I put Hendricks at the top of the depth chart at first, but it could be Gigi, it could be Taylor. There's just a lot of opportunities in Memphis now.
All right, let's go back up to the top of the chat. Obviously, if anything breaks live here, we will let you know.
Did you see that the Warriors have involved Draymond Green in trade talks? That's their big Giannis piece. We'll give you Draymond Green.
I saw a report last night that it's like they would trade Draymond and then he would just re-sign with them as a free agent next year. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you can't do that. Pretty sure you can't prearrange that. But that it's interesting nonetheless that Draymond is willing to seemingly play ball here. All right. So to the top of the chat, we'll get some non-trade questions here. Hey guys, thoughts on stashing Malik Monk and Collier Ware on the bench for a few more days in hopes that one or both get traded and dropping them if not. My Monk-like patience with them is starting to wear thin. Q Facepalm says, Intrepid Cephalopod, don't judge too harshly, Nick. As a new dad, you'll join the dad joke dark side soon enough. Yeah, I'm yet to reach that point, but I think I'll be getting there soon. I think we set a new low for sleep last night. Like I'm looking at myself in the camera, Kirien, and my eyes just look so red, which is accurate. They are very red right now. But a good question here nonetheless. Stashing Monk, stashing Ware. Sacramento is just so tough to predict as far as what's going to happen here. There's been DeRozan rumors. There's a report yesterday that Levine has already decided he's picking up his player option, obviously, for I think it's like almost $40 million next season. It's been encouraging that Monk is at least back in the rotation for the last month. I mean, there was a stretch where he was picking up DNP CDs, and then Levine missed some time. Schroeder had that suspension, and really ever since then he's been in the rotation. But the thing with Monk is there are kind of two ways where this could work out. Like he could either remain in Sacramento and they trade other pieces and then they have to play him big minutes by default, or obviously he could be traded to a quote unquote better situation. But you look at what he's done over the last month, Kirien, which is 24 minutes per game, 14 points, 2.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, whatever, low level starting fantasy value in a deeper league. If he goes somewhere else, is he going to be playing more than 24 minutes per game? That's what would worry me.
Yeah, I think the best case for Monk's fantasy value would be, Zach LaVine gets traded, DeMar DeRozan gets traded, and he gets thrown into 35 plus minutes for the Kings because that doesn't make any sense. And so that's why it makes perfect sense for the Kings, right? If he gets traded, he winds up on the Timberwolves or whatever. No, he's going to be playing 20 to 25 minutes and you'll have some of those big games. But if standard league value, probably fringy.
Yeah, I mean, as always, it depends, who are you not picking up in order to hold him? If you don't feel like there's somebody better out there, I don't think it hurts to, at this point, just wait 48 more hours and see what happens. Ware's a little bit tougher because the upside is just so much higher. When he sees even like 24 minutes relative to Malik Monk. I mean, it's been very rough over the last 2 or 3 weeks. He's had 4 DNPs in that span. He's averaging 13.2 minutes per game. When he is on the court, he's catching strays from Eric Spoelstra every night. It really seems like he's fallen out of favor. And, for somebody like Spo, who's been doing this as long as he has, to kind of lob an attack at his own player, in a very Spo way, says a lot, I think, about where that relationship is right now. But yeah, I think Ware to me is high enough upside that he's the guy I would be scared to drop. And then, something does happen with the Heat or, he's traded and all of a sudden he's playing big minutes for the Milwaukee Bucks a week from now. Like that's the one that you would really regret with Monk. Totally. Like if you're looking to drop one of these guys to open up a spot for whatever reason, Monk is the guy that I feel like there's much less chance that you would regret that later in the season.
Absolutely. That's a perfect way to put it.
Hey guys, would you trade Dyson Daniels, Brandon Pajemski, excuse me, and Keyshawn George for Sabonis and Keita or Marshall? So you're getting Sabonis and Keita or Sabonis and Najee Marshall, 9-cat 12 team league. I think if Sabonis is traded, this could be a good trade. Otherwise, no.
Yes, I totally agree that if he gets traded, this would be a good trade. If he gets sent to Toronto, which it seems like there's a ton of smoke there, RJ Barrett, Ochai Agbaji involved in that trade, I think that would be great value. How many assists would Domantas Sabonis rack up just doing a little dribble handoff, at the elbow with Brandon Ingram, and he just pulls up and hits that. So I think, I would want Sabonis if he gets traded, but this is a huge risk. If he doesn't get moved, the amount of games that he plays towards the end of the season is going to be very, very few. In terms of would I rather have Keita or Marshall, I think that all depends on what categories you really need, but I think Marshall is the better all-around producer, obviously, and Keita's kind of just those big man stats. And I think Najee has been very good for the Mavs, and they continue to be depleted. So I don't see that changing anytime soon.
The one thing I would worry about with Dallas is just competitiveness down the stretch. If you're in a league that, excuse me, throat is just a problem today. If you're in a league that goes through game 82, we saw Marshall rested on the second night of a back-to-back over the weekend. That was his first missed game all year. So we're not sounding the alarms necessarily, but that is something that would be in the back of my mind. I would still rather have him though, because there have been rumors that the Celtics are calling on centers. I think maybe that changes if Jason Tatum doesn't come back. It's kind of been quiet on that front for the last few days after we got that weird report that he's second guessing whether he wants to do that after everybody was saying that he's for sure coming back. So if Tatum doesn't come back, that reduces the sense of urgency for Boston. But I think the Celtics are looking for an upgrade at center. I think they'd be willing to put Simons on the table in order to accomplish that. I don't know if they were ever aiming for someone like Jaren Jackson Jr. Probably not. But the bar, for as good as Kate has been, the bar is fairly low as far as an upgrade there. So I would worry a little bit about that rest of the way. What about Poeltl and his value if he was moved to the Grizzlies? If I'm understanding this question correctly.
I think he's maybe Raptors. I think Poeltl's value is at an all-time low right now. His back is cooked. He can't stay healthy. A 7-footer who has recurring back issues is not somebody that I want to target in fantasy right now.
Yeah, I mean, to put it in context, I confidently dropped him in a 15-team league last week. I don't think there's a world in which he's playing back-to-backs. Even if he does get healthy, he could play, like, best case scenario is he plays like 20 games, the rest of the season. I think he's in a bucket right now where you just can't depend on him.
And if he gets healthy and is playing in games, Colin Murray-Boyles has been fantastic defensively, and Sandro Mamu has been pretty solid too. So not playing back-to-backs and definitely not playing 25 plus minutes.
All right, so somewhat of a two-part question here. Should we even try to process this Jazz-Grizzlies trade from a fantasy perspective, or do we need to wait till the deadline? Oh no, we're doing what we can to process this right now. If you missed the start of the show, feel free to rewind. We covered that in full. We'll talk more about it a little bit later. If we are going to analyze this deal, which we are, would you drop any of Filipowski, McCain, Reese, Scoot, or Fears to add Walter Clayton or Taylor Hendricks?
Well, my answer, I already answered Hendricks or Clayton. I'm going to take Hendricks over Clayton just because of fewer competition or less competition in the front court compared to the back court. Jared McCain is a really interesting piece. Obviously, with the Paul George injury, theoretically, there's more minutes available for him. But McCain is kind of like Jaden Ivey was in Detroit, right? He's just not going to see enough minutes to deliver consistent fantasy value. So I think he would be the first drop. Yeah. Scoot is probably definitely the second drop, but maybe the first drop. But he's on the comeback. So if you kept him this long, definitely don't want to drop him at this point. So
it's also a keeper league. I should have specified that right away. So it is a keeper league. That I think that impacts how you view Scoot. It impacts how you view Reese, certainly Fears.
Yes.
I wouldn't drop Fears in a keeper league. Very interested in. I'm interested in Clayton. A little bit lower than you on Hendricks. I mean, again, it's hard to argue against the minutes potential for Taylor Hendricks. So I'm with you on that. But yeah, I think it's probably McCain for me. And then we didn't really talk too much about how this impacts Filipowski in Utah. I mean, the depth chart is kind of a disaster right now. A lot of that really depends on, like, all right, how much are they actually playing Jaren Jackson? How many nights are Jackson and Markkanen playing together the rest of the way? I expect them to move Nurkic. Do they actually do that? Do they reroute Lendl? But they are a little bit heavier at center than they are at power forward.
Yeah, I think this is just going to be a continuation of what's happening for the last couple of weeks, right? Where Nurkic plays and then he sits out, and then he plays and then he sits out. And then, Jaren Jackson plays and then he sits out. And Markkanen is going to be in that group too. So I don't think you can trust anything. But I wouldn't be dropping Filipowski yet, just because, like you said, Utah can't win too many games, right? So Filipowski, I think is a hold for now, but there's so many questions, and it's going to be a headache in Utah.
Yeah, no question about that. It's been a 4-year headache for the Utah Jazz and fantasy hoops.
I think we can finally, the Bryce Sensabaugh silly season. That's probably gone at this point now, but
yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I mean, it's like, where does Vince Williams slot into this? I think we still see a decent amount of Sensabaugh down the stretch, right? I mean, I think you're a little more concerned about the front court guys. And I know Sensabaugh kind of plays all over, but I think he's versatile enough that he'll still have a role. Let's talk a little Trae Young here. What is the right value for Trae right now? Thinking of moving him to someone who can and is willing to hold. Would getting Norm Powell or Desmond Bane be too low, or should I be asking for more? I would take either of those guys in a heartbeat. If you can get Desmond Bane, especially. I don't know what's going on with Powell, by the way. He's going to miss a third straight game tonight with a personal matter. I've not been able to dig up what that is. Usually you can find something, whether it's like a family emergency or wife is having a kid. Maybe I've missed it. I've not been able to find it. I wonder if that's Miami being cautious in advance of the deadline, perhaps, even though Powell's name has not really come up nearly as much as someone like Ware or Hero, but something to keep an eye on there. Again, if you can get Desmond Bane for Trae Young, who could very well not play at all the rest of the way for the Wizards, I think, that's a no-brainer. Honestly, I would say you'd be aiming too high going for Bane or Powell, but if you can get either of those guys, just pull the trigger.
Totally agree. And the only thing I would add with Norm Powell is he was initially listed as questionable the last 2 games. Now he's doubtful for the 3rd game. So it doesn't seem like, he's just away from the team. It seems like he's on the fringe of coming back, but not the next game.
Okay. I need help. LOL. I have PJ and Curry in IR. I will hate my life if these guys don't play Thursday. Then I could have made a claim earlier. Said he has low fab remaining. So we got a list of players here: Najee Marshall, Tari Eason, Trey Johnson, Andrew Wiggins, DeMar DeRozan, and Ty Jerome, I believe. Who to drop out of those two? Presumably to bring PJ Washington and or Curry off of the IR. So of that list, who would you drop?
Well, Trey Johnson's currently out right now, so you could just throw him into one of those IR spots. I can't drop Ty Jerome at this point. No. DeMar DeRozan is just a fringy guy. I've liked Najee. He's been really productive, but like Nick said, he just missed the second half of a back-to-back, so maybe that's happening. This one's really tough for me. I think if you want to play it safe, you're going to hold on to, DeMar and Andrew Wiggins, just because those guys have a history of, playing in games and being productive. Yeah. But I think the upside is holding on to Najee and Eason and Ty Jerome. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't drop DeRozan either. I know there's a chance, he could be traded to a worse situation, but he's still giving you 22, 4 and 3, good free throw percentage, good field goal percentage. I wouldn't be dropping him. I mean, is there a case to consider just dropping PJ Washington compared to PJ Washington versus Eason? I mean, even versus Najee Marshall, as crazy as that sounds,
I think I would rather have Najee Marshall than PJ Washington. I think I would be confident in saying that. So I think that's a fair move.
All right, who do you guys think is the biggest stash in Memphis? So going back to the big trade, if you're just tuning in, that is Jaren Jackson, now a member of the Utah Jazz. So we talked about some of the immediate value changes, who rises, who falls. But anybody you'd be looking at stashing, I guess, for later in the season, or if we view this from a keeper dynasty perspective, somebody you'd be kind of specking on going forward.
Yeah. So you mentioned these 2 names earlier, but Walter Clayton and OMP, right? Olivier Prosper are the 2 guys that I would classify as stashes, right? I think Ty Jerome has the high value right now. Taylor Hendricks and Gigi Jackson see an immediate boost in the short term after this trade. But the 2 names that I would be looking at a month from now that have the biggest increase would probably be, Walter Clayton and Olivier Prosper, just because if they do go full tank mode, prioritize some young guys with some minutes. And I think both of those guys have pretty fantasy friendly skill sets, even though their skill sets are totally different.
Yeah, and I think in certain leagues, I would throw Gigi Jackson into that mix too. I think there's going to be, I think people tend to gravitate to the player who was traded. Guys in a new spot, like, oh, Taylor Hendricks, I got to go grab him. You kind of forget about some of the remaining players who are still going to get a boost. And I'm curious to see if we get more of Gigi Jackson, but it depends how much they ride Taylor Hendricks. If he is a 25 to 28 minute a night guy, then maybe it's closer to a no change for Gigi. Not that anybody is going out and starting KCP or even rostering KCP at this point, but he is somebody, his minutes have already been on the decline over the last couple of months. He's somebody you could start picking up some DMPs down the stretch. I don't see the merit in rolling out Santi Aldama, Taylor Hendricks, Jalen Wells, Cedric Howard, and KCP So I think he's somebody that, if you're looking for, all right, where do these minutes come from? Maybe some rest nights coming up for KCP. Adam says, as a Jazz fan, I'm worried this might mean Memphis passes us in the standings, but seems like a decent deal. Yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's only a 5-game difference right now. Memphis has been losing like crazy. Utah has still been competitive on a lot of nights, but again, both teams are very interested in draft positioning here. And I as much as you made a compelling case, Kirien, for wanting to at least see what this looks like, and I think they will. I think they'll dip in some nights where Markkanen and Triple J are playing together. This is much more about next season for Utah. They still have their first round pick in 2026. They will be tanking just as hard as they always are, in my opinion.
Yeah, and just for clarification, Adam means passes as in falls below them
right
in the standings.
Yes,
because the Jazz's, their standings are inverted.
Yep. We got a trade story here. I had a Triple J for Sabonis deal an hour before the trade. I would have received Sabonis. That's all down the drain now. We got a broken heart emoji. The Sabonis owner backed out. Yeah, fair.
Yeah. I guess so. Obviously you don't want to take on Jaren Jackson after this deal, but what was the delay in the trade? Were you waiting for physicals? What was the
this is why I always like, if I feel like it's a pretty even trade, I do like to give it a little time to ruminate, just in case, right? Like, especially if a player involved in the trade, like let's say you get the trade notification at 3:00 and you're like, okay, well, this player plays tonight. Like, I'm going to at least wait and see how this game goes, right? Like, I'm not going to get him in my lineup anyway. I don't want to commit to that trade. And then, there's an injury or something like this happens. So
fair enough.
Unfortunate timing for sure. You would have had yourself a steal there, but I don't know who's, putting anything real on the table right now to get Triple J. Yeah. One guy we did not talk a ton about in Utah, Kirien, is Isaiah Collier. Does he end up as a beneficiary here?
No, I mean, I don't think his role, obviously, okay, so like Keontae George is a stud and he's proven that this year, but if the Jazz, continue to use rest days like they are, tonight with Keontae George, Collier and Clayton were going to be the guys to step up. So I guess you can make an argument that without Clayton, Collier is going to be, have no competition for that spot. Maybe Vince Williams plays some point guard. But I don't think his value changes that drastically. Like you were kind of talking about with Clayton being able to play 2 guard. I think when George rested, that Clayton and Collier were still going to play the same amount of minutes. I think Collier is a fine fantasy option right now, but his value is more tied to when Keontae George plays or not, as opposed to anything that happened this trade deadline so far.
I would agree in that there's higher single game output, of course, when Keontae George is out, but Isaiah Collier is still approaching 30 minutes on a lot of nights, even when he's coming off the bench. He's played the last 2 games that he started in place of Keontae George. He's played 30 and 29 minutes. 2 games in between those coming off the bench, he played 30 and 27 minutes and had 22 total points, 5 total rebounds, 13 total assists, 5 total steals. I think he has to be a beneficiary. It's not a massive boost by any means, but you're removing a guard who was seeing minutes and was going to continue to see minutes during the tank down the stretch in Clayton. So I think by default, you get a small bump if you're Collier. All right. Hey guys, I just got offered Andrew Wiggins, Ryan Rollins, and Devin Booker for my Jalen Johnson and Jabari Smith. Would you accept this deal?
I'm not trading Jalen Johnson right now. That's a hard no. I would need a couple of names that absolutely blow me away. And while Devin Booker is a solid name, I'm obviously with Kevin Porter Jr. no timetable and Giannis getting traded. Ryan Rollins is fine. It has some upside there, but Jalen Johnson is a league winner in my eyes. So I can't trade him unless I'm getting absolutely blown away.
This is a 9-cat league. It depends to me. Like, are you loaded? Like, rebounding is what you'd be losing most here. Obviously you're giving up the best player, or the best overall fantasy player in the deal in Jalen Johnson, but you'd be taking a pretty significant rebounding hit. You're giving up the 2 best rebounders in the trade. I don't know. I don't think this is a bad deal necessarily. If you're a Devin Booker guy, I think that you're getting the 3-for-2 side of this. I think Ryan Rollins is the key to the deal. It's like, what do you expect out of Ryan Rollins the rest of the season? I'm of the belief. I'm throwing up my hands at this point as to whether Giannis gets traded or not. I don't know how this is going to turn out. But I think the Bucks should be interested in showcasing Rollins the rest of the season, because who else are you even trying to develop? Who else is even remotely a keeper on this roster going forward? It might just be him and like AJ Green, and that's it. So, it depends how many games is KPJ missing. If Giannis remains with the Bucks, is he just basically sitting out the rest of the season? But I think there's a lot there with Ryan Rollins. I mean, last 15 games, 15 points, 5.5 rebounds, 5 assists, 1.5 steals. Percentages are going to be up and down, but overall in that stretch, 44% from the field, 43% from three.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And like you said, if this works out where you have a strong, a huge lead in the rebound department, then you can take that hit. I think this is totally a fair trade. I just think that I have a better chance of winning a fantasy championship with Jalen Johnson on my roster than Ryan Rollins. And for what it's worth, Alex told me last week that even if Giannis doesn't get traded, he doesn't envision Giannis playing another game for the Bucks.
Yeah, it's hard to picture. Yeah, I don't know because Giannis is Giannis. I could see him like making a point to be like, you know what, I am going to play down the stretch. And he almost started to get into like 2018 LeBron Cavs mode, where it was like a performative play by him. Where he's like, I know we're terrible. I know we're gonna lose this game. I'm gonna go out and get 30 and 17 and just show you how bad the rest of the team is. So I don't know if he's played his last game for Milwaukee. Either way, though, I wouldn't want him in fantasy.
Yes, totally. I was on your side of the argument, but he was pretty adamant about it. And like you were saying, Giannis kind of made a point earlier when he against the Bulls, I think that was against the Bulls when he dunked at the last second or whatever, and was like, "Hey, we're playing. We're in the mud now. We're playing dirty," which I like it.
Hey guys, do you think Ausar will lose minutes in production to Kevin Huerter? Is he a drop in 14-team leagues?
I don't think he will lose minutes in production. Ausar hasn't, played 30 plus minutes consistently, right? I think Ausar's role as, a defender and a little bit of a playmaker and fast break kind of guy is solid, but he hasn't played 30 minutes since January 10th, right? And before, so it's not, I don't think he's going to be dropping down below 20 minutes anytime soon. But so I would say you can definitely think about dropping Ausar, but I don't think you should drop him strictly because of the Huerter moves. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. I don't think I would drop him quite yet. Again, Jaden Ivey wasn't playing overly well. He wasn't playing a ton of minutes for Detroit. Again, the percentages were a little better than I would have expected. But I also don't think you're bringing in Huerter with the expectation that he's playing 35 minutes a night. I think it's kind of a pretty easy 1-for-1 swap there. As a Triple J owner, what do we do now? Do we keep him for a few games? Then we shop him around? Yeah, it's tough because I don't. Maybe you wait until he does suit up for the Jazz. Maybe they play him 3 or 4 games in a row, and you could talk somebody into like, yeah, it's gonna be frustrating, but when he's out there, it's gonna be great. I don't know. I mean, you're gonna have to live with the fact that you're definitely taking a hit, right? You're trading him for significantly less than you could have gotten 3 hours ago.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you do wait until he does play because, like we've said, Utah's kind of going back and forth where Nurkic plays some nights and he doesn't play. So I think, maybe they're just on a cycle, right? Where Nurkic plays one game and Jaren plays another, or maybe Nurkic gets traded. But I think you do wait. And then, like you said, he maybe has a 3-game stretch or something, and then you get hot, but you're going to have to be willing to, take a lesser deal to just get some production down the stretch when he's resting.
Yeah, and to be clear with Triple J, I don't see this being a full-blown Trae Young situation where, I truly don't know if he's going to play the rest of the season. I think Jaren Jackson will play enough games where, especially if you're in a daily lineup league where you could swap him in and out, it'll be inconvenient and you'll probably get caught a couple of times, but you could still live with that. In weekly leagues, that's where it gets a little dicier. I'm looking at the risk to me would be if your league goes through game 82, Markkanen was still playing pretty consistently. He was playing more than he was sitting through essentially the end of February. Then there was an injury, and then he just didn't play the final 13 games of last season. That could certainly happen with Triple J, but I think he'll play enough, over the next few weeks, especially coming out of the All-Star break, where there'll be a window where you can get something, but you're just not going to get full value, unfortunately. Hey guys, do you think DeAndre Hunter would get value with the Kings? 9-cat, 12-team league.
So this is one of those funny ones where you're like, target the guy that just got traded, right? In our stake league, DeAndre Hunter got zapped up for like $18 worth of fab.
I did not approve of that move.
I think Kurt was getting a little excited, and wasn't really sure what to expect with Hunter in Sacramento. But I rostered Hunter for most of the season. I've told this story on this podcast probably a dozen times already, but at one point I had to make a roster decision between DeAndre Hunter or Jalen Tyson. And because Jalen Tyson didn't have forward eligibility, I had to, I let go of Jalen Tyson when Darius Garland was back healthy or whatever. And I fully regret that decision. Hunter, especially in a category league, he's a good points guy, maybe 3-pointers when that shot is falling, but that shot has not been falling this year. And currently, I don't think his situation is much better. Zach LaVine is still on this roster. DeMar DeRozan is still on this roster. Malik Monk, Russell Westbrook, Domantas Sabonis. Obviously, we expect some of those guys to get traded, but those are still, there's a lot of high usage players in Sacramento. So it's not like Hunter's just going to be able to chuck 25 times a night.
They'll make some moves, I think, but they can't trade everybody. And DeAndre Hunter, to me, is not one of these guys where it's like, oh man, he's been wasting away as a fourth option. Like, man, what if he had his own team? It's DeAndre Hunter. He's ultimately a role player. So I think it's an upgrade compared to where he was, because it clearly just wasn't working in Cleveland. He was shooting 30% from three over the last 20 games, and there were pretty loud whispers that he was going to be out of there. So I think just from a situational standpoint and from a potential opportunity after the trade deadline, he's probably going to see more run, I think, in Sacramento than he was in Cleveland. But I wouldn't expect, a massive uptick.
DeAndre Hunter or Malik Monk?
Oh, man, knowing what we know now, probably Hunter. I don't know. I'm a huge Malik Monk fan, like just dating back to his days at Kentucky. But again, this idea that he'll be traded, I just don't think it's going to be a better fantasy situation.
Fair enough.
All right, let's see if we can do one or two more here before we head out. Hartenstein or Drew or Klingon rest of season in an 8-team head-to-head 9-cat league.
My gut instinct is Hartenstein. Drew Holiday hasn't really been playing more than 25 minutes since coming back. What's up?
I got to cut you off. We have another trade. And we got a hard out in like 3 minutes here. So I want to hit this one quickly. This is from Shams. We were talking about it earlier, Kirien. The Chicago Bulls are trading Nikola Vucevic and a second-round pick to the Boston Celtics for Anfernee Simons and a second-round pick. So there we have it. The Boston Celtics get their upgrade at center.
Finally traded Vucevic. I did not see this coming from a Bulls perspective. Take away everything that I said about Jaden Ivey with this move with Simons coming in. I think the Bulls are probably going to want to package a couple of these guards and get on the move again. But that's quite a deal. And the Celtics are a team to watch here in this Eastern Conference. They're getting good. I really like this move, and obviously this is a huge hit to Kata's fantasy value.
Yeah, I don't know if I love this for Boston. I mean, it's an offensive upgrade, obviously, but it's a defensive downgrade. It's likely just a rental. Definitely. Yeah, like you said, for Chicago, if we assume status quo with Kobe White, then obviously there's a huge logjam right there. But I think this pushes me even more toward Chicago parting ways with Kobe White before Thursday. Certainly a downgrade for Kata. Talked about that a little bit earlier in the show. And I think it's got to be a downgrade for Vooch, right? I mean, you go from being, I guess in some ways, kind of the number one option in Chicago. Like Giddey's the heart of your offense, but he's, not a crazy high usage guy. Vucevic on the year is averaging 31 minutes per game. I don't know if he's getting 31 minutes per game in Boston.
I've made this joke with Mike Barner all the time. Billy Donovan loves to bench Buzelis for his lack of defense, but never benched Vucevic for his lack of defense. Yeah. If he's slacking, if he's playing that drop coverage, Kate is going to be in the game. And like you said, this is more of an offensive upgrade. So the Celtics might play offense defense with that center rotation, which would mean bad value for both of them.
Yeah. Last thing I'll say on this, and then we got to get out of here. I think it's an upgrade for Simons. Chicago is,
and Barter's been talking about this forever, but Jalen Smith and Zach Collins. So Zach Collins is hurt right now, but Jalen Smith has been really good, and his trajectory is just getting better.
This is massive for Jalen Smith. Somebody I missed out on by $1 on waivers a couple weeks ago in our staff league. This is huge, man. Jalen Smith has been, I think, underratedly good. Maybe for people listening to this podcast, you're like, yeah, duh, we know that. But I think in fantasy hoops in general, especially if you're not playing in deeper leagues, this is massive. I mean, I'm looking at the 12 games where he's played even 24 minutes this season. He's averaging 13 and 9 with 1 steal and 1 block, 52% from the field, over 5 3-point attempts per game. So wheels up for Jalen Smith, and assuming they trade Kobe White, wheels up for Anfernee Simons as well. All right, we got to get out of here. Again, apologies for the scheduling change this week. Barutha will be back with me next Monday. We'll be on our regular schedule. Kieran, you'll be back with Mike tomorrow, continuing to break down all of the fallout from these trades. I mean, the Bulls being involved here is going to be a hell of a show with Mike Barner on Wednesday, and then we'll have trade deadline fallout coming later in the week with Ken and Shannon as well. So 4 episodes a week continuing to come your way here on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Want to thank our presenting sponsor, Dabble. Go check it out. We'll put that info in the description below. If you're listening on audio, you can find it there as well. And we will be back with you next week.